Good morning. Welcome to the Foster Swift Sports Talk podcast. I'm your host, Dave Russell, alongside my two co-hosts, Charlie Sarche and Tony Delamonte. Today, we're excited to welcome JT Rogan back to the podcast. JT brings a unique perspective to this rapidly changing world of college athletics. He was an All-American running back at the University of San Diego, where he played under Jim Harbaugh. After his playing career, he worked on football staffs at both Stanford and Michigan. He's also the executive director of the Ole Foundation for the University of San Diego, and is, I think, generally considered one of the top NIL minds in the country. And so we're excited to have you back, JT.
Oh, Dave, we were talking with Tony beforehand. Just as soon as I got the text, my fingers were burning on the screen. How quickly can I get back to Anthony and say, yes, I'm in. I'll be back on the show.
Unbelievable. You're the man, JT.
Thank you.
So, I guess I can ask the first question. So, obviously a lot has been going on in college sports in the last, even the last week. For those who haven't followed all of this, I guess, how would you sort of summarize what's been happening for just the lay person and, the casual college football viewer?
Yeah, I would say most notably the NCAA's Hail Mary is in the process of falling to the ground out of bounds. So their strategy and hope and prayer to receive an antitrust exemption seems to be failing. Now, balls do get tipped and redirected back inbounds, and Hail Marys can be answered, but this one is in the process of improbably just not ending up the way they need it to. So I would say that, overwhelmingly the NCAA is not enjoying the direction that things are going in. But basically what you're getting is now an eligibility change, which predictably people who didn't have this eligibility status last year now want it this year, because the people this year will have it going forward. And you now have 5 years to play 5 years. It used to be 5 years to play 4, and then it turned into 9 years to play 4, depending on if you were a 27-year-old tight end at Miami, Florida. So there's been a ton of change and undulation, and international players were coming over. So they're trying to set some constraints around, reasonable timelines about when you're able to compete at the collegiate level. And so that's the topic and flavor of the day for sure. But the reality is a lot of people complain about it. Viewership's never been higher. Interest has never been greater. Nobody's jumping off of the Michigan or Michigan State bandwagons because of the fact that there are too many transfers. And the one thing I really do want to mention about transfers is that, Division I athletes at large transfer less than regular students. Now, football and basketball, they transfer more, but their graduation rates are at or above typically the graduation rates of regular students who transfer. So there's a lot of pearl clutching and a lot of sky is falling rhetoric, being perpetuated by the, older community or the people who don't like what's going on in college athletics right now. And the reality is it's, not all that deleterious or negative to the future outcomes educationally, especially for the people who are doing the transferring. So we can all just stop worrying about the sky actually falling.
So, JT, you referenced, obviously, the big news over the last couple of months, which is the 5 for 5, which in a nutshell gives a player coming in or that's currently playing in college 5 years, and we do away with these red shirts, and and I want to get your opinion on whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But also the thing that we're seeing right now in real time are these lawsuits related to the high school class of 2022. And, we're all attorneys sitting at this table, and it's, one of the things we do is legal strategy. And as I look at what the NCAA does, I'm not a big fan of the NCAA on a lot of things, but they really seem to have messed this up in a way that I didn't even think they could do. So I wanted to get your opinion on that and maybe your thoughts on why they did it the way they did it.
Yeah, it's hard to get in the mind of the NCAA because, their logic seems to be circular, deficient, or devoid in some cases, just absent of logic. So I can't maybe surmise or speak to why I think they did it. Their most popular strategy, is to, fight the lawsuits, but only to the extent that it stalls and drags them out, and it costs more money. That sometimes they're not even necessarily looking for a resolution or a win. For football players, this class of 2022, you're going to have 4 months until it actually doesn't matter anymore. Their eligibility is going to be finally exhausted. And if you think that you're fighting on behalf of your member institutions for competitive balance and parity, it really is just this false red herring, illogical approach to the whole situation. So I just don't get it, don't understand it, don't like it. I played 6 years myself. I had 2 hardship years. One was a medical, one was a personal circumstance. I think that whatever the rules are that they choose to enforce, if they can enforce them fairly, it makes sense. I did see something that was kind of interesting just in this current climate, that pregnancy can allow you to extend your 5 for 5, but with all the rights that men are now getting with, paid time off and everything, like if your partner's pregnant and you're a male, like, can you conceivably, get a 6th year? I'm guessing you're going to continue to see edge cases and, fringe applications of this. There's military, there's, religious, right? Like your Mormon missions and such. I just think that you're not going to stop seeing legal challenges to this eligibility framework. And until you have a players union and a more unified base, the NCAA is going to have to continue to endure the legal challenges of every edge case and unique circumstance in the landscape.
I was going to say that starts to sound like you're describing an employment matter.
Yeah, it is what it sounds like.
Yeah,
it only sounds like that because it is. It's exactly what I mean. If it looks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, and walks like a duck, it's a chicken. You're wrong. It's not a duck. No, it's a duck.
So JT, just to clarify it, maybe Dave, you can too. But the athletes who are able to bring lawsuits, 2022 high school grads, those are ones that have started for 4 years straight. They didn't take a red shirt that first year. So they're the ones that will be able to probably have some success in these lawsuits coming up.
Yeah, the major issue for them is whether or not they have the ability to transfer. And so as I understand it, they opened up a temporary transfer portal for like a few days. It's governed by the terms of the injunction, and then you have to be a member of the class of that lawsuit. So they're really hemming in everyone, which is a shame because, I'm trying to advise people who are on limited resources, guys who just started to make some NIL money, and they're trying to figure out, do I go and play basketball internationally for $90,000 a year in Finland and support my wife and daughter, or do I try to roll the dice for more money and get into the legal weeds of it all? And it's just disappointing because the NCAA truly is trying to delay, extend, keep the meter running on so many of the people that they're supposed to be representing and protecting. So I do think that it's a proverbial slam dunk for 2022s to get their 5th year because they've only played 4. It doesn't necessarily matter how they've arrived at that. But then, what you haven't seen yet is basketball and baseball. Like, are they able to actually transfer? Okay, you played 4 years at James Madison, but now you want to go play at, Ole Miss, and you want to be in the Power 4. That's an opportunity that shouldn't necessarily be refused to you. And you were operating under old guidelines, and then now there's new direction. And so the messiness, the NCAA is not out of the woods yet.
Well, that's what I was going to ask as well. Is Dave and I know very well, from one of the cases that we had where, a kid was a 2022 basketball player, and you're graduating. You graduated in May. You might be sitting out there. You might not have might not be enrolled in a school, and you probably aren't if you didn't think you had more eligibility. I mean, have you seen instances with even football players? I mean, we're in August, campus started. Practically, what are these kids doing that, we're just granted this additional year of eligibility, if you've seen anything?
Yeah, I've just what I've seen on social media, and it all makes sense. Schools that have money and capacity and can find a roster spot, by the way. So what you're not seeing is the bottom of the roster that's just having its legs cut out from underneath it, because that is happening. Texas and Indiana both added guys. The Texas guy was in an NFL training camp. I'm guessing the Indiana guys probably had some similar trajectory, or maybe you might even see some UFL guys being like, this UFL thing is kind of nice and everything, but I really like that campus life. If you're going to give me a victory lap, down in Baton Rouge or Gainesville or something, I'm sure I can justify it. And not only that, you saw this in the basketball season too, like with Charles Bediako, mid-year addition. You could certainly see that. What happens if your left tackle gets hurt, or your quarterback, or your linebacker? It's like, I know a guy off the couch like Aaron Donald who we can just bring right in, and we can get some immediate depth. I was at the recruiting and personnel symposium down in Nashville last week, and this was a topic of conversation. Like, we could really use some depth at this position or that position. And then they're like, do you know anyone? Do you know any guys? And this was, maybe a lower power 4. And they're asking me like, who's out there? What do you got for me? So people are fishing. They're like, and you need backup plans. You don't want to get caught, without a solution to the problem. And so, yeah, the Texases and the Indianas can, just reach into their, graduating class Rolodex and be like, this guy didn't project for an NFL body, but he's a heck of a college player. So we'll bring him back. And I expect that you'll start to see some legal challenges and probably some wins for players who want to play one more year, want to play somewhere else where there is opportunity, where there wouldn't have been at the university or institution where they were last year.
Well, then there's issues with roster limits too, right? With who you're bringing
and
in.
Allocating funds.
Yeah.
I mean, the reality is everyone's got a budget, and you go through the process and you allocate those funds. And so,
at this point, I'd imagine most schools have hit their the max they can pay out too, until like new negotiations start around December.
Yeah, but a lot of schools are just working to figure out how they're going to circumvent the rev
creative
share piece.
financing.
If you're coming back for a 5th year under unique circumstances, then you're going to have to be willing to accept payment under unique circumstances. It's all kind of like, honor amongst thieves, and not that anyone's stealing anything, but it's like, we all get it. We understand that the rules that we're playing under change, sometimes month by month, but definitely in this case, year by year. And so, we'll figure out a way to have these non-guaranteed, guaranteed funds, to get a player back to make a team better.
And it seems that, excluding the class of 2022, all these lawsuits was the most predictable thing that could have happened. So the NCAA, in all its wisdom, had to know that this was coming down the line, and they had to know you're going to have a situation, which we're in right now, where you have a really uneven playing field, because you have some 2022s that have gone out there and they've sued, so they have the preliminary injunction. We have the one in Colorado. I'm skeptical of whether that stands on appeal or not. And if it doesn't stand on appeal, then the players that have sued in state court individually, they'll still have their injunction, but the other players, theirs will be gone. So you're going to have this uneven playing field. It just seems to me that this was so poorly planned going into it, and there must have been some kind of strategy that I'm just not smart enough to understand.
Well, the strategy that I have thought the NCAA has maintained for a while now is that there's almost no such thing as bad publicity. It's like, this 27-year-old wants to play. Well, we did our best, but the local yokel judge in Knoxville, Tennessee was like, I'm a volunteer and you're on in. But that just amplifies the need for regulation, and, it amplifies the voices of the sky is falling and what are you doing with my college athletics? And so I think the more anarchy that is created publicly is absolutely, in the minds of the NCAA, a benefit for their case for antitrust exemption, except that's not exactly the way that it works. It's not just the louder you scream, the more you're heard. The issue is so complicated, especially from a political side of things, that Cruz and Cantwell, who are trying to force through the Protect College Sports Act, are getting some pretty nice opposition from other lawmakers and politicians, but also the wants and needs of so many people aren't being sufficiently met by that single piece of legislation that trying to solve all of the issues underneath one act is proving to be super challenging. So like any good, piece of legislation, it should get stripped down. It should be more narrow. I would like to see the more specific outcomes instead of pork barreling and just jamming a bunch of things that maybe are inappropriate or aren't. Like, one of the major issues is the gender issues in athletics isn't sufficiently resolved. That was one of the major objections at the 11th hour most recently to the Protect College Sports Act. Is like, can we actually define like who gets to compete and, gender assigned at birth? Like, is that going to be the ground rules for it? So for all the things that it tried to get done and protect college sports, it's not exactly protecting if you're not, solving and answering one of the largest problems and most politically or publicly challenging issues that confronted athletes in the last 2 years. And you're seeing at the WNBA level right now, the basis of gender and how you define who gets to compete inside of a gender specific organization.
And I think we talked about it a little last time. Personally, my thought is they have to end up with collective bargaining at some point. I think that's the end. I don't think, legislation, is ultimately going to be successful. But, from your perspective, where do we go from here? I mean, even since the last time we talked, a lot has happened. So, is there an end? Are we going to reach a point where we have some reasonable restrictions in place and, sort of everyone's okay with that? Or, what do you think the future looks like?
It's hard because if we just proceed like this in this universe where the Power Four stays and the CFP expands and a little bit more money comes in and everyone's an associated entity, then collective bargaining absolutely makes sense. And that's not to say that it doesn't make sense if it happens under other circumstances. But if you start to see the Big Ten and the SEC maybe poach a couple members from the ACC and the Big 12 and then go start their own super league, now you're talking about a full-blown, professional organization, and it looks completely different. And how the mechanics of all that happen, I don't even know. But I think that collective bargaining makes the most sense. And one of the reasons it makes the most sense is because we need to solve all of the issues facing the athletes that we're not taking care of. The ongoing healthcare, saving for later, actual financial literacy, actually having a seat at the table, not being strong-armed into awful contracts by schools and conferences that, control the direction and the narrative of it, or these poor agents who aren't doing their job and aren't qualified to represent athletes. Since we last talked, and sorry, I'll get on a tangent, but I offered to advise a player, and I basically am like, I'm your agent, but I'm not your agent, right? I know what contracts should look like. I can advise you on all this. I'm going to save you a lot of money. I can get quality legal research and expertise to make sure that your contract is structured the way that it needs to. I'm not that guy. He ended up going with a guy, who's the Big Ten guy. The player went with an NFLPA certified agent, and it ended up being a nightmare and one of the worst experiences for him. So the cautionary tale is like, just because you're an NFL agent or just because, you work with college football doesn't mean that you're the guy or you're the person who's solving the most pressing issues and needs inside of it. Similarly, just because you're not an agent doesn't mean that you might not be really well equipped and adept at solving that. And I say all that to say that, these Foster Swift guys who are living it every single day in multiple sports, who care about sports, and have legal aptitude and are aware of it from the high school to the college ranks. And then, college guys obviously go pro too. Like, that's the type of outfit that you want to align yourselves with. And I'm not paid to say this. It's not a testimonial. It's three dudes who I like a lot, keep in touch with all of you, personally and otherwise. And so that's what you need, right? That's what the space needs more of. And so collective bargaining would be led and structured by people who have the athlete's best interests at heart, not just people who treat them like, pawns on a chessboard.
Yeah. I've spoken to a number of athletes when discussing with them and their parents about representation, and they tell me that certain agents, promise them a certain amount of money and guaranteeing that they can go get it. And it's really, it's a tough world to navigate.
I think you've seen that the NFL certification sort of does play a big role as well. That
As parents of high school sophomores, they're like, we need that right now. We need that right now.
Need it.
Yeah, and JT, we appreciate the kind words. We certainly do. And from our standpoint, we need more people like you in the conversation to, move this forward, because I think everyone, there's so many people love college sports, but they know that it's in an untenable situation right now with all the litigation and all of that. And I personally, I think collective bargaining is the ultimate, answer to that.
But kind of like you said, and you mentioned it too, JT, I read a similar article that sort of reiterated that popularity, like viewership has never been higher. There's never been more money in college athletics. There's an argument that there's more parity now because of, the transfers and everything we've seen. And so, I think the pearl clutching is a good way to describe it, but when you actually dig into the numbers, I mean, it's a valuable sort of media business to be in, and people are going to turn on a college football game on Saturday and watch the big games regardless of what you say in the offseason.
Yeah, and the reality is that there's some version of salary caps or not in the professional ranks. There's hard caps, there's soft caps, there's no caps, and the Dodgers can pay as much as they want to pay. And the NFL, everybody's got to pay $275 million or less this year. And then the NBA is starting to create luxury taxes, and, it gives you less optionality, and you got to get guys on certain contracts and everything. And so there's no one right way necessarily. But you're seeing very vividly that these athletes are willing and able to get paid a lot of money. And so right now you're forcing them to come up with these really creative structures outside of the revenue sharing cap to try and pay their rosters if they want to compete at the highest level. There's not a long-term strategy for it. And then nobody is advocating for the athlete. I mean, how much money do you need to live off of this year? Let's say it's $250,000 as an 18 to 24-year-old who has all your expenses paid for and covered. You want to take care of your mom and you want to drive a nice car and all that stuff. That's fine. Like, let's talk about saving for later. Let's buy some bonds or follow the S&P 500 or have, deferred compensation, or, with Coach Harbaugh, we had a split life insurance plan. There's so many different creative investment vehicles that 18 to 24-year-old JT would have, probably been indifferent to at the time. And then 40-year-old JT sitting here today would have been like, man, it'd been really nice to be able to cash that in right now, or be able to borrow against that, or buy my first home. I mean, we're homeowners, but those are the types of things you'd like to be playing from that deck. And so nobody is talking about that or thinking about that reasonably. Like, there are a couple of companies like Athletic Estate and others that really have a long vision for protecting the athlete, but it's hard for anyone to hear that and, to have 18-year-old JT be like, yeah, I'm going to set aside some of my wealth this way. And that's where the schools can help. They can be like, yeah, this is our policy. In the same way that you sign the scholarship agreement, in the same way you trust us with your development, you're going to need to trust us with a fraction of your earnings. Again, with so many people now, if you're a starter on a football or basketball team, you're making $250,000 or more. And if you're not, you will be making double that next year because your earning potential is so high.
Yeah, and I think Michigan is one of those schools. Sorry, guys. I went to an event, I think it was 2 years ago, where, all the alumni come back, and Mike Martin and Blake Corum talked, and that's, really what they talked about. And Blake was really impressive and, talked about how he bought a rental property in Ann Arbor when he was a freshman. And by the time he graduated, he had, X number of rental properties. And so now he's in the NFL, and he's got, basically a real estate portfolio, and he's probably 25, 20, I don't know how old he is, but he's in his mid 20s. And, I completely agree that is something that schools should be, putting more focus on and giving those resources to athletes.
But it's a microcosm for what athletic departments do. It's like, if it doesn't move the needle and make more money or bring in more donations for us, then it's just not going to be a priority. So financial literacy is a talking point and a box check. It's not a priority because it's not going to help you win more football games. And some athletic administrators don't even see it as their job. They're like, hey, if we're forced to give you $500,000 of money that we didn't have to give you 5 years ago, that's on you. And I just, again, that's the old school mentality. We've got old leaders operating under, the old constraints and framework. Like they came up as NCAA administrators, and they got compliance backgrounds, and they sat on these boards and committees and brainstormed and thought of all the things that they need to do to protect athletes and the NCAA and the universities. And then now it's just, mercenaries and guns for hire, in their minds at least. And so all of these things that should have been happening, like giving, communities access to collegiate facilities and giving them access to players and giving players access to donors. Like it took an act of Congress for me to get Jake Butt with the donor who endowed his scholarships at University of Michigan, like couldn't even make the intro, and they were kind of had to like look the other way. And so it's just insane that somebody would, be able to, again, endow a scholarship and then, only treat them to an occasional meal with reasonable expenses. And it's an outdated, archaic way of thinking. And so these new leaders, these new innovators, these pioneers who are thinking differently and leading athletic departments differently, are starting to see some real, upside benefit from just not playing from the old deck.
JT, assuming we kind of stay in the status quo, at least for the next couple of years with the 5-for-5, revenue sharing, NIL allowed for business purposes, what changes do you expect to see or have you seen since that has started?
Big Ten dominance, winning national championships. The SEC and some of the ACC were, very polished and around the cap, above the cap compensation. And now that competitive advantage is mostly dissolved. So I do think that the Big Ten, when given the opportunity to activate their proud alums, I mean, you're seeing it with enormous donations through Spartan Ventures or the Ellisons or the larger Michigan community. And so they're able to do what other people had been doing impermissibly. And so there's some formalization there. I think you're going to see, private schools that really are serious about athletics continue to advance and decide that can be the future of their school and their program. I look at Miami, Florida. I look at High Point. I even look at my alma mater, University of San Diego. Like we can reach into our endowment and decide to fund sports, especially at High Point and USD, where $10 million can make you relevant immediately. We're not at that point at University of San Diego, but you can decide to be good for much more affordably than you could be otherwise. And so I look forward to seeing some other schools emerge and decide that this is something that they're going all in with. It's not expensive. I mean, if you have $50 million, and I know it's not expensive, but there are billionaires everywhere that graduate from all these different schools. You can make your school relevant and good immediately with the right leadership and the right budget. And you need to have a vision for that. If you have the wrong person in place right now, underfund them or don't fund them or do whatever you need to do to create turnover, to create a Signetti effect. Again, easy to say, hard to do. But you saw it with Michigan basketball. You've seen it with Signetti. You've seen it with, even Texas Tech softball. They went from being 20th to, second in the country effectively because they got one player and they had a good plan in place. And so I'm hopeful that we can continue to see schools emerge and decide to invest in athletics and then allow the rest of their athletic department maybe to draft off of the greatness of the national championship glow and the investment that they make into an individual sport, coach, player, group of players. And so I like that. I think it's really novel and it's incredible that opportunity is available when otherwise it might not have been.
Yeah, JT, along those same lines, as we're kind of talking about some creative financing options, I'm curious to know your take or your opinion on the patch deals that are starting to show up, like the Big 12 with Monster Energy, Michigan State with MSU, FCU. Did Ohio State do one too? I can't remember who else, but
SoFi, Notre Dame, Chase Bank.
Right.
They're all undervalued. These are massively valuable assets. $20 million, $17 million to be on a top 5 football team alone, probably still undervalued. Now, something's only worth that somebody will pay for it, and the market's not mature enough, and people haven't figured out all of the ways to activate on this or to project, hey, here's the strategy for how we're going to deliver on this. There are a couple companies out there that do a pretty good job. CSMG is one of them. I know Ray Katz there, and they're advising Arizona on Jersey deal. Pivot is another one. They're more West Coast, but they just signed University of San Francisco to help advise them and land someone there. And I'm helping, to small, big sky school, trying to help advise on, how do you do that at the best of your ability. But to be on the jersey of all the teams across an athletic department is a good investment only insofar as that you can monetize it. And you've got a creative team and a social team, and you've got a plan, and you've got access to the athletes, and you'll be shooting, your individual content at the venues. But I think it's wildly lucrative. And by the way, like jersey patch is only one item, right? Like you could have a helmet sticker, you could have, and then you've got some existing apparel deals and rights, but there's so many different ways that you can activate it. I mean, Anthony, I think back to us and Chase Winovich with orange hair.
Yep.
Like there's a lot of different ways that you can go with it. And so some of the multimedia rights companies think that it's their asset. A lot of these contracts are older and they don't necessarily call for this, and they could outdate the NIL era. They might have been signed before 2021. But what if you make that a property of the athlete, right? It's like, how do we think creatively about really empowering people to earn? And, is that a possibility? It's still just very early on, but my general opinion on them, and I think it's corroborated by people who are well-versed in the space, is that these things are really valuable, and only to the extent that you can, grow your business off of them. But I think you'll see the business case and the white papers and everything in the years to come suggesting that the value far exceeds the cost.
Maybe it ends up like golf, where everyone walks in with different patches all over them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
And then the coaches are wearing like, oh, that's interesting. He's wearing a State Farm insurance hat
just for the first half.
Yeah, exactly.
Foster Swift helmet sticker for Michigan State.
There you go.
Yeah, but then you go to the CFP, right? And then that's governed a little differently. The rights are different than the kind of the regular season, and the conference championships might be out. They're on the fringes, and so everybody's trying to fight for a claim to what's right and what's fair. I mean, and again, Oklahoma State did it last year before that, where they put a QR code for donations on the helmet, and the NCAA very quickly nixed that. But and this is the idea that I had. I was talking about it with one of the leads at ESPN, is can we just put a QR code next to the player's name on a chyron or a lower third when the broadcast is being covered? Or do you have a second stream, on Twitter or on mobile, so that, you can easily donate and contribute? I mean, if a guy scores a touchdown, you want to give him $10, they call it pay for play, but just, the timing of it was such that, Anthony had a pick six, and then I really like Anthony. He's a great guy. And then there's $100 for him. I mean, I'm like a free market capitalist on steroids, like, and I've never taken steroids, never was big enough, never had the need. Non-scholarship football didn't really require it, but I like free market capitalists, like, let's pay them, and then let's also support them with the infrastructure or the collective bargaining or the good representation, because both things can coexist. We can have free market capitalism, we can have people well represented with a seat at the table. Right now it's like anarchy, neo-communism. I don't even know what you would call it right now.
How has your perspective from, I guess a fundraising standpoint been, since we last talked? I know you're a guy who, always is improving and, obviously works very, very hard. But, what's something that you're working on and you're sort of, trying to find your way through, or sort of, develop an additional expertise in or refine?
Yeah, I think that the process of fundraising and understanding it from a donor standpoint, how do you put yourself in their seat? So the University of San Diego it is the example I could speak to, obviously most proficiently, but we've done a lot of stuff around football. We had a reunion where we brought Coach Harbaugh back last year, 5 days before he's going to go down to Brazil to beat the Chiefs in week 1, which was awesome. And we just had another reunion this year. He was not there, but we had a bunch of people from different eras. And the effect of that, serendipitously or perhaps by design or subconsciously, Coach Harbaugh gave $500,000, is now naming the weight room, the Jim and Sarah Harbaugh family weight room at University of San Diego. We had a former player and somebody who's still on staff, amazingly, give $2 million to create a football players lounge and to redo some facilities. So what you're seeing, what I might call the Matt Lester effect in the University of Michigan community, is if you bring somebody in and you include them and they feel a part of the community and they see the support and they enjoy their experience, they could end up disproportionately giving more and being more supportive. And that was Matt Lester. He went to Iowa game with us, brought his son Asa, went to the Ohio State game with us, brought his son Asa, had great experiences, and then endowed the defensive coordinator position. It's not rocket science, but it's always been such a protected asset where we haven't wanted to include people. Now University of Michigan, you can pay to run out with the team and touch the banner. I think that was maybe sold too cheaply, and I don't love that just personally, but I understand it. And so that's not going to decrease enthusiasm to give and support and be tethered to the program. And so I want to see more of that. I want more engagement and inclusion and involvement. And the people that are thinking about that and who are creating pathways for activating with donors, with supporters, ideally in the lowest infringement and inconvenience for the coaching staff, but creating the highest yield and the most upside. Like, those are the people who are winning. And those are the guys and gals who are going to see success going forward. So that's really where I'm spending time. And I'm thinking, from a University of San Diego standpoint, I'll land the plane on this, but we had an auction item that was for $1,750. You get a Dalton Kincaid signed football, USD alum, go Toreros. And you go to a game, tickets, pregame, postgame, field access. He's at the golf tournament. I bring him up there. Then the bidding starts going $2,000, $2,500, $3,000, $4,000, $4,500. And then he stops it. Hey, I'll sign my jersey, game worn, give it to you. $5,000, $55,000, $6,000, $6,500. And then finally the guy who bid $6,500 is like, Roberto Duran, like, no mas, I'm done. Can we just do 2 of these? Can we do 2 of these at $6,500 and we'll call it good? And they're like, yeah, bingo. So $13,000 because you've got a former player there. The atmosphere is good. The people are right. The cause is noble and worthwhile. And so, these are the types of things where it's simple but not easy, and you just have to be thinking about it and have the right people engaged to create the right outcomes.
JT, we hear about these new entities that are being formed by the university, such as Spartan Ventures. I believe, you had the one at University of San Diego. Can you kind of explain what the idea behind that is?
Yeah, as I understand it, they are trying to be in the business of sports without being under the governance of the university and the athletic department, so to speak. All the structures look different. Some of them even share some of the same hallways and such. But the business of athletics is now enormous, right? And so, LSU had the governor down there, and they're talking about private equity and venture capital. I've got it on good authority that that's not really what it is. That's what they're calling it. And there's investment taking place, but it's investment that is structured as part of revenue being generated elsewhere. And so that's kind of the entry point and the cost of doing business and maybe the formalization of the business arrangement. But the rights deals are going to continue to change. The apparel partners are going to continue to change. And the dollars in the system are going to need to be brought in more conscientiously and distributed more conscientiously. And so it's gotten too big, and an athletic department is archaic and is the mean, they used to have compliance. Now it's really CSC who's governing things, right? Like they used to have, fundraisers, but the best fundraisers at Michigan State and Michigan are getting paid $100,000. Maybe the people leading the department are $200,000 or $250,000. If you're making $250,000 in the business community, depending where you live, you might just be getting by. In New York, in San Francisco, certainly here in Seattle, like you can barely have a single person income and raise a family on $250,000. I say all of that to say that the best fundraisers and the best people in the community are multimillionaires, are billionaires, are people who have capital, know what it takes to raise capital, have success and wins under their belt. And it's not in, asking people for money. It's for demanding money from people. It's for being a part of the donation and the contribution themselves. So they've got proverbial skin in the game and dollars in the game. So when you see Spartan Ventures, it's meant to be led by, high grade ass kickers who are out there who can create business effects and business outcomes that aren't tethered to the athletic department or don't have to, fit into this box and look this way. And it allows, nimble thinking and decisive action that would typically be stalled or blocked by athletic administrators or athletic departments. So I think you're just seeing the private business interests really be able to be structured and supported and in some cases empowered or employed outside of the university community or outside of the university formally, but covering the university more broadly.
Well, the whole structure just seems so intentionally vague to me. And I guess it's hard to wrap your mind around how those funds are going to be used, whether they're going to use them to try to guarantee, salaries or not salaries, but payments to student athletes in the coming years if they stay, or if they're just going to use it on, infrastructure at the university, renovations, things like that. It's difficult if you're not in the know to really understand where those funds are going.
Well, all athletic departments would really just prefer that you give to a general fund.
Right.
And you as a donor probably want to give to a specific person on a team or to a team in general, but they want complete autonomy and be Geppetto, the marionette, about where the money goes. And so that's what you're seeing from Spartan Ventures and such, because if there is collective bargaining and they do formalize it, now all this money that you thought you were going to need for above the cap, NIL, revenue share, blend, $30 million, $40 million a year outside the cap, now needs to be allocated and spent somewhere else. So I do think that having the flexibility to be able to assign tens of millions of dollars to, a media company to facilitate the above the cap deals, or to the structures, or to the emerging technologies, or buying equity in an emerging technology that is going to be used by Michigan State or perhaps by Michigan, or to support a state-run venture that is going to be able to generate outsized returns. You can't even think of all of the different applications of what you would need to do with that money. But I think the smartest thinkers in the room at these schools recognize that they're going to have to move differently to give themselves the type of latitude and competitive advantage and flexibility that they know that they're going to need in the next 5 years, that they feel like they probably haven't had in the 5 prior.
JT, where do you see things in the next 5 years? I know we're kind of getting long on time here, but where are we going?
Yeah, so the House settlement is supposed to last for about 5 more years. I think that's probably when we get employment, we get collective bargaining. I think the pressure ends up getting too intense, and college athletes figure it out and they get alignment, and somebody takes up the banner. Athletes.org is trying kind of, but ultimately the financial incentive is going to be too big for the unions or too big for politicians, or the social capital and the governmental capital that people can earn from getting this win and getting this over the finish line is going to be too great, because what you've seen is inaction because the cost has been too high. The outgoing Biden administration was like, in Title IX, you should be paying people evenly. See ya. And then the Trump administration came in and was like, yeah, it's not exactly how we're going to do things. It's, this isn't a presidential pardon where you say it and I'm leaving and nobody can hold me accountable for it. It's like, yeah, we actually have to put some real deliberate thought into how we're going to treat Title IX, which, by the way, NIL's doing wrong, in my opinion. Student visas, paying them, arbitrary amounts based on their performance, but calling that revenue share, I think that's also impermissible and is compromising student visa status. So we still have a lot of problems right now that NIL is creating and not solving and not trying to solve, that formal employment and an organized group and a players association would really allow us to solve so many of the problems that exist. And so I do think that some form of employment and collective bargaining is almost the inevitable outcome because the money in the system is so great. Venture capital is not it. Why would you take money from an outside entity when you've got alums and donors and supporters who are strategic and intentional and successful enough and who would give you better terms? Like, why wouldn't you just borrow money from them at a discounted rate? If you're competent and capable, and you've got all the resources, you've got all the legal resources, you've got government funding, you've got a law school, typically, you've got innovators and thinkers and people who are intellectual about it. Like, let's just get them all in the room. We can figure this out together. So I think in 5 years, yeah, you do see this is just another pro organization. It's like hockey. It's like, basketball, NBA, NFL, NHL. It just turns into, maybe NCAA, maybe not. Maybe a super league because, who wants to watch Middle Tennessee State take on, Nevada, Reno? Nobody's filling up a stadium for that, regardless of how much they're funding their rosters with. No offense to Derek Mason and the Fighting Wolfpack as well at a Reno, biggest little city in the world. But I think that feels like where we're headed.
GT, the last headline I'll throw at you that just kind of popped up in the last 24 hours that kind of goes along with that. Jaden Daniels had an attorney that filed a cease and desist against LSU to stop using his likeness. And I found that interesting. I'm wondering if maybe more lawsuits like that will pop up, as these guys get further into their professional careers and out of their collegiate careers. And obviously that likeness becomes very valuable as they grow into their professional careers. And I think they were saying it was just because, or at least I read it as, they sent the cease and desist just because LSU gave his number to somebody else. Yeah. But I just wonder, some of these NIL licensing agreements that college athletes sign, they might grant the university rights to their NIL indefinitely. Maybe that's a negotiation tactic on behalf of the student athlete to try to limit that to a certain amount of time after they leave. Just kind of curious on your thoughts there.
Yeah, I don't think that the school should have the NIL rights in perpetuity. That is something that should be negotiated. So that's just a quick one there. I am of the opinion that nobody is bigger than the program. So if your jersey is not retired, or even if it is, okay, they haven't awarded number 9 and nobody's wearing Joe Burrow's number, but now you're in your feelings that somebody gets to wear your number. It's not yours. The records aren't yours. Nothing about that is yours. You were eating off of the LSU plate and you ate well and you're fed. And so for you to throw your sucker in the dirt is wholly immature and is poorly advised. I might be uncommon that way, but to me, I hold records still at University of San Diego, and I want people to break them. And if this guy was promised a number in his recruitment, was it in poor taste? Yeah, and so was the fake, Southern accent that Brian Kelly used. But guess what? Everybody signed up for it. So it's not yours, Shaden. And however, if you don't want the school to use your name, image, and likeness, it's also not theirs. And so I love it. It's a little bit of the Mel Robbins. It's to let them. You don't get to control how somebody acts, and they don't get to control how you respond. And so let them give the jersey away, and you also don't have to let them use your NIL going forward. So it's, people operating in what they believe to be in their best interest. But that jersey number is not yours. Nobody said it was yours. It's not retired. And again, even if it was, you see a lot of guys being like, hey, that's okay. Yeah, you can wear it. Do right by it. And then some people are like, absolutely not. I saw something, I think Matt Leinart might have said, like, no way I'm giving a, 18-year-old from, some city in some state who thinks he's the next, God's gift to the world wearing my jersey. That, again, his prerogative completely. And I might feel differently about that if my number were retired. But nobody's bigger than the program, And so if it's going to help the team win, and that person wearing your jersey is a good reflect. By the way, the player who's trying to get the jersey, I think was a freshman All-American, complete ass kicker on defense. Like, it's not like Joey Bag of Donuts is wearing your jersey, right? So
maybe recruits will start paying, current athletes when they come up.
Like the NFL players.
Yeah, like NFL players.
All the best ideas have not been thought of. We're not even close. And so I look forward to seeing the continued innovation and the progressive thinking in the space. And then I look forward to Foster Swift, helping to insulate them and protect them from the downside risk.
Oh, so you mentioned records last night. Actually, had a late night, and then I ended up clicking on some of your highlights, JT, on YouTube. And I have to ask, did you put running back pancakes to start some of your highlight videos?
I cannot confirm nor deny said accusation, but let the record show.
Badass.
Let the record show that there were some blitz pickups and chips that occurred in or around the 2007, 2008, 2009 Pioneer Football League communities where I chose violence. And one of the proudest compliments that I ever received was that my head coach, after Coach Harbaugh, Ron Carragher, said that I was the best pass blocking running back that he had been around in the 20 years that he had been coaching, and he had been at Kentucky, and he came from UCLA, backed up Troy Aikman. And it was something that was taught to me by Jack Harbaugh, how to pass block, how to, be a blocker, and then practice regularly to my detriment, I'm sure, like, pre-CTE. I've got CTE light, half joking. Hopefully full joking. I just don't know. But yeah, contact courage, being tough, being physical, prioritizing it, doing that for your teammates was something that was crucially important to me. So,
well, shame on me, because I watched the beginning highlights and I'm like, I knew he threw a couple passes, but is he the quarterback? And I was like, where is he? And then I had to zero in and see the pancakes to start the highlight video.
No pride in blocking. No pride in passing. Plenty of pride in blocking. The touchdown passes that I had 2 of them. They were awful, the ugliest touchdown pass you've ever seen. But the thing that is not a record, that is my most proud record, is, again, I never lost a fumble. Never cost my team, a turnover. And that's something that nobody can ever take from me. And I hope somebody does it more than me and has the, unofficial record or whatever. But like, those are the things that we need to focus on. Those are the priorities that support the team and support winning, and that are helpful, that people don't seem to care so much for. So yeah, I tell people, like, you're the all-time leading rusher. I'm like, for 580 yards a year for 6 years, like, anybody could do that. And my quarterback's still in the NFL. I never saw 8 people in the box in the history of my running back career. Just the game's not, you're not bigger than the game. It's all for the team. I love, I'm emceeing the University of San Diego football kickoff banquet here September 4th. And then going to Northwestern South Dakota State September 5th. I'm advising one of the players at South Dakota State. And then Tim Drevno, the offensive line coach for Northwestern, was my coach, and obviously was at Michigan with us, Anthony. So it's football season, baby. Let's go.
Well, you're being humble. If anyone has some spare time, it's a fun watch. JT was quite the stud, and then Dave and I were talking earlier that your stats on ESPN are a fun look, because they're unbelievable, both rushing and receiving. So, you're a humble guy, but we got to give you some props.
Yeah, and thanks so much for joining us today. You're so much fun to talk to, and in my mind, I think some of the leaders out there need to get you involved in, crafting a way forward, and what I think you referred to as anarchy, which is probably stated best. But thanks so much for joining us today. We really, really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate you guys. Like, these are the current issues. This is so much fun. I was telling my wife, I live in Seattle, so it's, I had to be up by 6 a.m. and recording this at 7 a.m. And And she's like, "You're doing what? Where?" I'm like, this is important to me. Like, I want to do that. I enjoy this. You guys, you're asking all the right questions. And I knew I had to have a Jaden Daniels, answer for you guys. So I was all too happy to be able to wax poetic on that a little bit. And then I was expecting a Michigan or Michigan State, question. So I'll just say that I think the two teams are pretty even this year. And, I look forward to seeing Michigan State get back to it and seeing what Kyle Whittingham can do in year one. But I have no pick in that game. I'm just excited for some good football and to see if the state collectively can, increase the win total and make the rivalry restored a little bit. The Paul Bunyan Trophy. Let's go, baby.
Absolutely. Let's do it. Well, we appreciate it, JT. You're the man.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
This was
you.
awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks.